The wind cut sharper when dusk fell, sweeping across the snow-covered plains like a knife honed by silence. Smoke curled from the chimney of a lonesome wooden cabin nestled at the foot of the granite ridges, no other roof in sight, no sounds. Save for the groaning of wind through pine and brittle timber, Thomas McCrae stood by the fence line, hammer in one hand, a rusted nail in the other. His shoulders were hunched beneath a canvas duster, worn to threads at the cuffs. He moved like a man with nowhere to because there was nowhere left to go. He paused when he heard it. Not noise, exactly. Just the absence of the usual quiet. 10. Dark figures emerged from the tree line, moving slow, horses trudging through snow up to the fetlocks. Apache warriors lean, armed, and silent. Not one broke formation. Not one called out. McCrae's hand moved to the Henry rifle resting against a fence post. Fingers brushed the cold steel, but he didn't lift it. Didn't aim? His breath puffed white as he watched them close the distance. They made no sign of threat nor peace, just presence. He stood there as if carved from the land itself, the wind tugging at his coat. And they stopped 20 feet from the gate. The front horse stepped forward, hooves crunching the frost-bitten ground. Its rider dismounted. A tall man, regal posture, black braids tied with sinew, and deep eyes that carried generations of fire and ruin. He raised both hands, palms open. McCrae's gaze dropped to the boy slumped on the horse behind him, maybe 12, maybe younger. Blood darkened the snow where it dripped from his thigh. An arrow shaft still jutted from the flesh. The fence creaked in McCrae's grip. Years ago, Thomas had been someone else. He wore a uniform, then gray, until it turned to rags and blood and later a ring. A simple gold band that never left his finger, even now. His wife, Lorna, used to call him MC, soft like it was a comfort. Their son, Daniel, had hair like corn silk and a voice that never stopped asking questions, but then came the fire. A settler dispute, too fast and stupid to explain. Men with torches drunk on pride and fear. The house went up in the dark of midnight, and Thomas had come back too late. The next morning, he buried them with his bare hands. Left the grave markers unmarked. He walked west after that. Farther than reason, bought a stretch of land no one wanted. Built the cabin with his own blood. Never again owned a horse. Rarely spoke. When traders passed through, he nodded once and traded furs. That was all. The land became his penance. The silence, his punishment. I talked to the wind. His voice would sometimes whisper to himself on cold nights. It's the only one that knew when to listen. Now the wind brought strangers to his door. The leader of the Apaches, McCrae, would learn his name later. Red Moon held his hand steady. Not a word passed between them. Only the sound of snow melting on warm hides. McCrae looked down at the boy again. Pain twisted his face, though he made no sound. The others sat tall on their horses, wrapped in hides and shadows. McCrae gritted his teeth. Something knotted in his chest, grief or fury or both. A part of him screamed to close the gate, to let them ride on. This wasn't his fight. Not anymore. Not after everything. He looked at the arrow again. The wound. He remembered how Lorna bled, reaching for him as smoke swallowed the sky, and maybe it was that memory. Oh, maybe it was something older than grief. Older than war. He stepped forward, unlatching the gate. It creaked wide like the sigh of an old spirit. The Apaches didn't move at first. Then Red Moon gave a signal with 2 fingers. One by one they rode in. The boy was lifted gently from the saddle by one of the warriors. Red Moon nodded once to McCrae, deep and without expectation. Then walked past him. McCrae didn't speak. Didn't ask why. He didn't need to. They moved like ghosts into the yard. The boy was carried into the small barn, laid on the hay beside a cold lantern. McCrae fetched water, torn cloth, an old field knife. The Apaches formed a ring around the barn entrance, guarding their own with silent eyes. Inside, McCrae washed. The wound, the boy flinched, didn't scream. Not once. Red Moon stood behind him the whole time. No one thanked him. They didn't need to. Outside, the wind shifted. The sky was bleeding orange as dusk gave way to night. 10 strangers now sheltered on land soaked with silence. McCrae sat on the porch as the first stars blinked through the haze. His hands were still stained with blood, this time not his own, and inside him, something began to stir. Something he'd buried a long time ago, something that didn't have a name. The boy didn't cry out when McCrae pulled the arrow. He gritted his teeth hard, jaw locked like he knew the pain was owed to something older than himself. McCrae worked with practiced hands, cleaning, stitching, binding. Old army training. Muscle memory from another lifetime. The tools were rusted, the rags stiff with past wounds, but he made do. The others stayed back, forming a half-circle near the fire just outside the barn. They didn't talk, didn't blink. Just watched like a jury weighing a man's worth with nothing more than silence. The flames flickered on their faces, revealing paint, scars, and unspoken history. Red Moon stood behind McCrae the whole time. Another figure stood just to the side. Taller, more tightly wound gray hawk. His arms were crossed over his chest, and though his face was carved from stone, his eyes moved like a hawk's, sharply, silently, never missing a twitch. He tracked McCrae's every motion, his every glance at the boy. As if expecting betrayal at any second, McCrae didn't blame him. He'd seen too many men pretend to help only to pull a knife once backs were turned, so he didn't speak. Didn't flinch, just did the work. When it was over, the boy was resting, breathing shallow but even. McCrae stood, wiped his hands on his trousers, and walked past the line of eyes without looking up. He returned to the cabin, his boots crunching over the brittle grass. He left the door open. That was the closest thing to trust he could. Offer. The wind changed near midnight. It came low and fast, curling under the eaves like a warning. The horses started first snorting, pawing at the dirt. Then came the sound, distant, then closer. The unmistakable growl of wolves. Not one. A pack. McCrae was already lacing his boots before he reached for the rifle. He stepped outside, eyes scanning the darkness. Behind the barn, the livestock pen shuddered. Something spooked the animals into a frenzy. He didn't wait, just ran. Snow crunched underfoot as he rounded the side. A wolf leapt the fence, gray, lean, and desperate. Its eyes glowed pale in the moonlight. McCrae raised the Henry. Fired. Missed. The blast lit the darkness for half a second. The wolf whirled. Another emerged from the shadows, lower to the ground, teeth bared. McCrae reloaded with shaking hands. Fired again. This time the shot hit. The beast dropped, yelping once before going still, but the others kept coming. One lunged fast, snarling all hunger and bone. McCrae stumbled back, barely raising the rifle. An arrow sliced through the air and pierced the wolf's side. Another arrow followed, burying itself in the neck of a second. Red Moon and Gray Hawk stepped from the shadows like phantoms, bows drawn, feet silent in the snow. No words. No warning. They moved in sync. Gray Hawk cutting off the side flank. Red Moon loosing another arrow. 3 more wolves retreated into the tree line, tails tucked, vanishing as quickly as they came. The last stood its ground. It lunged. Gray Hawk didn't flinch. He met it mid-charge with a blade pulled from his hip. Steel flashed. The wolf's body dropped at his feet, twitching once. Blood soaked the snow. McCrae stood breathless, rifle at his side, chest rising like bellows. His hands shook. Whether from cold or something deeper, he didn't know. Red Moon looked at him, not with pride, not with thanks. Just recognition. And Gray Hawk, for the first time, lowered his blade before McCrae did. Later, in the stillness that followed, McCrae knelt beside the dead wolf. Its fur was matted, ribs showing, jaw half broken from the fall. That was the first time I saw one of them bleed, he muttered under his breath. For something other than war. He turned his head slightly. Red Moon heard him, said nothing. Didn't need to. The next morning, McCrae rose early. Frost still clung to the windows. The fire had long since gone out, but he didn't notice the cold when he opened the cabin door. A small bundle sat on the steps, dried meat wrapped in hide, smoked. Seasoned. A gift, Red Moon's work? No doubt. McCrae stood a while before picking it up. Not because he didn't trust it, but because he hadn't been given anything freely in a long time. He set it on the table and turned to see the injured boy sitting upright by the fire in the barn, watching a squirrel skitter up the trees. Beyond the fence. The moccasin on the boy's foot was torn likely during the ride. McCrae sat on the steps, took it in his lap and started to repair it, thread through hide. Not pull. The boy didn't speak. Just watched him. Later that day, Red Moon approached with logs under one arm, motioning to the side of the barn. McCrae understood. A smokehouse. They worked together, wordless, measured the planks, dug the pit. Red Moon showed McCrae how to layer bark with mud for insulation. McCrae showed Red Moon how to stabilize the slanted roof with a crossbam. Side by side. There was no laughter. No stories shared, but something settled in that space. Not peace, exactly. Not yet, but the beginning of something else. That night, the wind blew through the chimney, softer than usual. McCrae didn't speak aloud to it. He didn't have to, because now someone was listening. They rode in like they owned the earth beneath them, mud-splattered boots, tobacco-stained teeth, and rifles slung too loose over their shoulders to be anything but threats. 4 of them. Maybe 5. McCrae stepped out before the dogs barked. Or the horses could react, already knowing what kind of men they were just by the dust their boots kicked up. The lead rider was stocky, with a scar splitting his lower lip and a Confederate belt buckle half hidden under his coat. Clive. Harrow. McCrae hadn't seen him since they stood shoulder to shoulder in the war, long before either of them knew what kind of men they'd become after the shooting stopped. Well, I'll be, Clive said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Didn't peg you for the red lover type, McCrae? McCrae didn't flinch. You're not welcome here, Clive. Just passing through, Clive said. But his men were already surveying the property, eyeing the livestock, the barn, the open gate. Saw smoke. Thought we'd check who was dumb enough to burn fires this close to Apache territory. His eyes lingered on the corner of the barn where a figure had shifted, barely visible, but unmistakable. Apache. Clive spat. So it's true then, you've gone soft, taken to shelter in ghosts. They're not yours to touch. Clive's tone changed. Ain't about what's mine. There's a bounty on them now? Government wants registered or rotted. Dead's quicker. McCrae stared at him. This isn't bounty land. This is my land. Clive leaned in, voice dropping low. Don't make this personal, Tom. Hell, you and me, we go back, but there's coin to be made. And you got 10 of 'em sitting like ducks on your porch. You hand 'em over, we ride out clean. No blood, just business. McCrae said nothing. Clive straightened, eyes narrowing. You got 2 days. That's generous, Tom. After that, we ride back, and we won't be talking next time. They turned. Dust kicked up behind their horses as they vanished over the rise, leaving the smell of smoke and something worse, familiarity. That night, McCrae didn't sleep. The stars were sharp overhead, but they didn't offer answers. He paced the yard, arms folded tight across his chest, boots tracing lines into the frost. Each breath he took felt heavier than the last. Inside the barn, the boy slept beside the coals of the fire, his legs still stiff with healing, but his face softened, now looked at peace. McCrae stood at the threshold and watched him. In his mind, he saw Lorna, her hair matted with soot, reaching out to him from the floor of their burning home. Don't become like them, she'd whispered, smoke curling around her face like a final prayer. He hadn't known what she meant until now. Behind him, footsteps stirred the silence. Red Moon. The Apache chief stood a few paces back, arms crossed over his chest. He said nothing. Just met McCrae's gaze with something that wasn't challenge, and wasn't fear. Understanding. They were men carved from loss. Both had buried something sacred. Both had watched the world decide who was human and who was. And now they both stood on the edge of war again. McCrae didn't speak. He just nodded once. The decision was made. At dawn, he gathered them all: Red Moon, Gray, Hawk, the others. He knelt in the dirt, drew rough lines with a stick. They'll come from the east, he said, tapping the tree line. We dig here, lay brush across the pit. When they ride through, the front horse'll drop, we get the jump. Gray Hawk watched him the whole time. McCrae couldn't tell if he understood or not, but when McCrae rose, Gray Hawk took the shovel. First, they worked until their hands blistered. Dug trenches, dragged logs, sharpened pikes. Red Moon arranged their weapons bows, spears, hatchets. McCrae reloaded every rifle and pistol he owned. By nightfall, the barn looked like a fortress. The land around it, a trap. The boy limped out carrying firewood. McCrae helped stack it. No words passed, but the gesture hung in the air like smoke. Gray. Hawk passed behind them, paused, then a nod, subtle, almost invisible. But it was the first. The sky darkened. The smell of pine mingled with gun oil and dirt. The ranch was quiet, save for the rustling of wind in the branches. They didn't speak. Of what was coming, they just waited. Snow had begun to fall just before dawn, soft, slow, and silent. The kind of snow that made the world look clean again. Even if it wasn't, it covered the scars of yesterday like a lie whispered sweetly. But McCrae knew better. Some things didn't stay buried. The sky was gray when he spotted them cresting the ridge, 5 riders. Dark shapes against the pale light, horses steaming at the mouth, rifles strapped high. At the front was Clive Harrow, chin tucked, eyes sharp beneath a black hat dusted with frost. They came fast. McCrae waited behind the split log wall they'd built from pine trunks. Heart pounding steady, now not from fear, but something colder. He looked to his right. Gray Hawk crouched low, bow drawn. His shoulder was bare, paint fresh. A warrior ready to die. To his left, Red Moon watched the tree line. No tension in his frame. Just silence. Poised like the land itself. The trap was set. Clive's men galloped through the pass, unaware they were entering a funnel. The lead horse stepped onto the false brush covering the pit. The ground gave way with a crack. Wood and snow collapsed, swallowing 2 riders, a scream. The horse reared back, snapping a leg in the fall. Gunfire exploded. McCrae rose from behind the barricade and fired. The first bullet struck a man in the thigh. Red Moon loosed an arrow that took another in the neck. The world turned into chaos. Horses scattered. Smoke curled from musket fire. One of Harrow's men returned fire, hitting Gray Hawk in the side. He didn't go down. Just threw his tomahawk so hard it split bone. The man dropped dead before he could scream. McCrae ducked behind the log, reloading. Bullets chewed through bark and snow. Red Moon grabbed his arm, pulled him back, not out of fear but strategy. He pointed to the left flank. Clive was moving to circle, trying to get a clean shot. McCrae nodded. He circled wide, ducking behind the barn. When he emerged, rifle raised, Clive was there alone, his gun aimed. You always were too noble for your own damn good. Harrow spat. You never were, McCrae answered. He fired. Clive Harrow dropped into the snow. Red bloomed beneath him, vivid against the white, but not before his last bullet flew. It struck a horse tied near the post. McCrae's Marie, the one he'd raised from a foal, screamed and collapsed. By the time the smoke cleared, it was over. 2 of the Apaches lay still in the yard. Gray Hawk, wounded and bleeding, leaned against the wall, but still alive. The snow kept falling, covering everything in a layer of quiet. McCrae dug graves until his back gave out. No one offered to help. No one needed to. It was his land. His fight. He buried the Apaches with honor, placing a feather beside each mound. He buried Harrow far from the others with no marker. Just rock and cold silence. Gray Hawk sat on the porch, a strip of cloth pressed to his ribs, face pale. McCrae handed him a ladle of water. The warrior drank slow, then looked up. You stayed, he said, voice broken but steady. Each word was hard. 1. McCrae sat beside him, arms draped over his knees. You bled for this land, he said. Voice rough. I only own it on paper. There was a pause. Then, for the first time, Gray Hawk smiled. Not much, but enough. Inside, the boy still healing fed logs into the fire. Red Moon stood behind him, one hand resting gently on the child's shoulder, watching, always watching. The war hadn't ended. But something had shifted. Trust, born of blood. By the time spring came, the snow had long melted, but the memory of Red in it remained. The Apaches packed their things quietly. No speeches, no ceremonies, just readiness. Most of them rode off one morning without waking McCrae. All but 2. Red Moon stayed, And the boy McCrae, he didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Days turned slower, the cabin expanded. The fields were plowed deeper. And one morning, McCrae lifted the boy, who was learning fast and growing stronger, onto the back of an old plow horse. The boy clung to the saddle horn. Laughing for the first time in McCrae's presence, he steadied the reins, walked beside him, and whispered, "I never had another son." He looked up at Red Moon, who watched from the porch. "But I gave the land to one." Weeks passed, the wounds healed. The fences were mended. The smokehouse stayed full. One evening, McCrae and Red Moon stood at the edge of the pasture, watching. The sun dipped below the ridgeline, the light spilling gold across the grass. They didn't speak, they didn't need to, just a quiet nod. Between them, not friendship. Not forgiveness, but something older, something earned. Would you have opened the gate? Tell us in the comments. If this story moved you, like and subscribe for more powerful tales from the forgotten corners of history.